Welcome back, everyone. For this part of the presentation, we're going to be essentially covering content related to China under the Shang, religious beliefs, and writing. Let's continue on, and please remember that your task here is to answer the key concept questions that coincide with the reading. China under the Shang. About 1650 BC, a Chinese people called the Shang gained control of a corner of northern China along the Huanghe. The Shang dynasty dominated this region until 1027 BC, and during the Shang period, Chinese civilization first took shape. In terms of government, archaeologists have uncovered large palaces and rich tombs of Shang rulers. Shang kings led other noble warriors in battle, and from their walled capital city in Anyang, they emerged to drive off nomads from the northern steppes and deserts. In one Shang tomb, archaeologists discovered the burial palace of Fu Ha, wife of the Shang king Wu Ding. An artifact showed that she owned land and helped to lead a large army against invaders. This evidence suggests that noble women had considerable status during the Shang period. Shang kings probably controlled only a small area, and loyal princes and nobles governed most of the land. They were likely the heads of important clans or groups of families who claimed a common, often mythical ancestor. Thus, Shang China probably more closely resembled the city-states of Sumer and the centralized government ruled by the Egyptian pharaohs. Social classes. Shang society mirrored that in other early civilizations. Alongside the royal family was a class of noble warriors, and Shang warriors used leather armor, bronze weapons, and horse-drawn chariots. The chariots may have come from other Asian peoples, and early Chinese cities supported a class of artisans and merchants. Artisans produced goods for nobles, including bronze weapons, silk robes, and jade jewelry. Merchants exchanged food and crafts made by local artisans for salt, crowry shells, and other goods not found in northeastern China. Peasant life. Most people in Shang China were peasants, and they clustered together in farming villages. Many lived in thatched roof pit houses whose eastern floors were dug several feet below the surrounding ground, and peasants led grueling lives. All family members worked in the fields, using stone tools to prepare the ground for planting or to harvest grain, and when they were not in the fields, peasants had to repair the dikes. If war broke out between noble families, men had to fight alongside their lords. Now let's move on to the next section for religious beliefs. By Shang times, the Chinese had developed complex religious beliefs, many of which continued to be practiced for thousands of years. They prayed to many gods and nature spirits. Chief among them was Shangdi, and a mother goddess who brought the plants and animals to earth. The king was seen as the link between the people and Shangdi, and gods as great as Shangdi, the Chinese believed, would not respond to the pleas of mere mortals. Only the spirits of the greatest mortals, such as the ancestors of the king, could get the ear of the gods. Thus, the prayers of rulers and nobles to their ancestors were thought to serve the community as a whole, ensuring good harvests or victory in war. At first, only the royal family and other nobles had ancestors important enough to influence the gods, but gradually other classes shared in these rituals, and the Chinese called on the spirits and their ancestors to bring good fortune to their family. To honor their ancestor spirits, they offered them sacrifices of food and other necessities, and when Westerners reached China, they mistakenly called this practice ancestor worship. The Chinese believed the universe reflected a delicate balance between two forces, yin and yang. Yin was linked to earth, darkness, and female forces, while yang stood for heaven, light, and male forces. To the Chinese, these forces were not in opposition, but rather the well-being of the universe depended on maintaining balance between yin and yang. For example, the king had to make the proper sacrifices to heaven, while at the same time taking practical steps to rule well. Now let's move on to the system of writing. The ancient Chinese also developed a system of writing, and writing, like religious beliefs, was an early development that continued to influence cultures in China throughout history. This system used both pictographs and ideographs, signs that express thoughts or ideas. Consulting the ancestors. Some of the oldest examples of Chinese writing are on oracle bones, or animal bones or turtle shells, and Shang priests wrote questions addressed to the gods or the spirit of an ancestor. Priests then heated the bone or shell until it cracked, and by interpreting the pattern of the cracks, they provided answers or advice from the ancestors. A difficult study, written Chinese shaped almost 4,000 years ago, and over time it evolved to include tens of thousands of characters. Each character represented a word or an idea and was made up of a number of different strokes. In recent years, the Chinese have simplified their characters, but Chinese remains one of the most difficult languages to learn. Students must still memorize up to 10,000 characters to read a newspaper, and by contrast, languages based on the alphabet, such as English or Arabic, contain only 24 or so symbols representing basic sounds. Not surprisingly, in earlier times, only the well-to-do could afford the years of study needed to master the skills of reading and writing, and working with brush and ink, so Chinese scholars turned calligraphy, or fine handwriting, into an elegant art form. A force of unity. Despite its complexity, the written language fostered unity. People in different parts of China often could not understand one another's spoken language, but they all used the same system of writing. Please proceed to the next part of the presentation for the final section of content for the textbook reading and key concept questions.